welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Beth Brooks and I'm the clinical advisor here at Vivian Health. And I'd like to ask you to join me today for a special session of On the Horizon in Healthcare. And I'm so excited to have one of my colleagues / girlfriends talk today about careers and career lattices and career planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a career ladder, what's a career lattice, and what are some of those questions that you can be asking yourself to prepare yourself for that next step in your own career. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Crystal. And I have her bio. So Dr. Crystal Lawson is an expert in nursing and leadership development at all levels of the organization, but has extensive experience with national leadership development. So I know Crystal from her time at the American Organization of Nurse Executives. But prior to that, she was the senior director for nursing leadership development for Ascension. Actually, that was after you left AONL, you went to Ascension. That's right. And you were the senior director for nursing leadership development. And that was planning and executing leadership development for over 60,000 nurses. So that's a big job. She was also the education director for the American Organization for Nursing Leadership and was responsible for the development and implementation and evaluation of AONL's education programs. And that's, again, how we got to know each other, because I used to do some of the programs for AONL. Prior to AONL, Crystal worked at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, where she held a variety of clinical and administrative roles, including clinical nurse, nurse manager, director of nursing education and professional development. And she's also been involved in role playing as a teaching learning strategy, where she's been not the learner, but the teacher in playing the role of perhaps an employee that you have to have a crucial conversation or having a practice with a meeting or something like that. So Crystal has experience sort of being on both sides of the table, so to speak. She has her DMP from the University of Tennessee, focused on the transition from expert clinician to the nurse manager role, which we all know is one of the more difficult positions to transition into in today's healthcare environment. And Crystal, finally, is also board certified in executive nursing practice from AONL. So I want to thank Crystal for coming today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. So we've been talking about Crystal when we were preparing for this session. She sent me some notes and some ideas, and I had some questions. And she said, "Oh, I feel like it's Fleetwood Mac. You can go your own way." And now I have that song like running in my head. But I think that's what we want to talk about today, because so often we don't necessarily do a great job in nursing, helping nurses plan their career. We seem to take care of nurses, when they're becoming a new graduate. Lots of how to do a resume, how to go to career services, how to interview. So that first job, there's more support. But once that is over, there's not a lot out there for nurses for career planning. So I know, and because you talk to these nurses all the time, it's like an alphabet soup, where to go to school, what type of certification, what kind of job might you like? Do you want to stay in management? Do you want to do leadership? Do you want to do something non-traditional? It can be really challenging to navigate by yourself. And that's what a lot of nurses end up doing. So today I want to share your wisdom, some of my wisdom, and how do we help nurses navigate this career landscape, because that's the beauty of nursing, right? There are so many opportunities in so many different roles in all kinds of different organizations. And most nurses say, how do you do? Like, I could just see one of the listeners saying, "Crystal, how did you do what you did? You went from all these roles and then you're doing this." So talk a little bit about a career ladder versus a career lattice, which is how we're starting more to think about nursing careers. So
I think, to your point, when you think about career progression, it's likely been thinking about a ladder, this one directional, traditional linear growth, where the emphasis is kind of on titles. It's straightforward, it's direct, and that's great for cultivating experience. So if I want to go staff nurse to charge nurse to nurse manager, or perhaps it's med surg nurse to ICU to CRNA, that's wonderful. However, I find it really limiting to seeing the bigger picture and gaining experience and new perspective. There really isn't only one path to be successful. Nurses and really everybody, we desire options and opportunities, and up is not the only way.
Well, and you said that up is not the only way, and that's where the lattice comes in.
It does. And so
So,
some people are not inspired by moving up the corporate ladder. In fact, they may be offended if we ask them, where's your next step? Where are you going? That's where career lattice comes in. So they aren't linear or one directional. You can be horizontal in addition to vertical. So shaping that should be really shaped by your own personal and professional aspirations. So if we're seeking this title or this increased pay, sometimes our ego can get in the way, right? You can have, you're seeking this passion and to gain this experience that are going to cultivate the skills that are going to serve you along the way. So the title shouldn't be the success or where you fall in the hierarchy. Everyone is just as important as you are. So different roles, even if it's lateral or what tradition would say is a step back, oftentimes can grow you more than a title ever will. So, and I don't want to say that I'm arguing that career ladders are invaluable. It certainly was the foundation to kickstarting for me. What were the possibilities that were out there, and how could I cultivate some of these skills that would serve me on the journey? I just find them alone to be outdated and limiting.
well, and I think that speaks to you and I and our generational differences, right? Because when I was a new graduate, you sort of progressed. If you wanted to go into leadership, let's say you were the staff nurse, maybe charge nurse, then manager, then director, then maybe chief nurse. And it was sort of the well-known progression, or you're a staff nurse, you want to go into nursing education and you want to do nursing education in your hospital. And there's nothing wrong, but there were go on the clinical track, do the education track, or do the leadership track. Well, now, as time has evolved, there's so many more options. And you and I both have had very non-traditional careers. So talk a little bit about conform and control. So, and I want to add to that, but I want to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because I think some of the conform and control is where you as the nurse need to learn to take control of your own career. So talk some more about that.
Yeah, I think that conform and control, or the traditional box that was developed, it was developed in the industrial age. So it's quite outdated, and the journey is really personal. So along the lines of, how is that limiting modern careers? The needs of today's workforce are much different and ever changing. And you talked about the generational differences. Oh boy, it is. And look, the last few years, we've really shifted into hybrid work environments. The playing field looks entirely different. What I do know is that people want to grow and develop, regardless of where it is that they want to be. They want to grow. And we aren't as loyal anymore to an organization. We may be loyal to a profession. If organizations and leaders would really support this new way and think of it as progressing, it doesn't necessarily have to be inside the organization. It can be outside. And I don't mean necessarily growing you out of the organization, which is not a bad thing, right? We don't own people. We serve a broad community and this profession, but let's capitalize on the value. And thinking back to the ladder, it can hold us back. There's room for everybody to succeed in a lattice model. So in addition to limiting somebody's career, it can limit your organization and your willingness to adapt. If you have this conform and control model, it's not a one size fits all learning and development. That's pretty complex. And, I do think internal programs are great and they should exist, but you can grow through a variety of mediums, and that individual passion, interest, fueling that, not necessarily just your job description or what's that next level that I should be going to. Should be, what is should, but we can meet them where they are and think about their strengths and experiences beyond that traditional role. When I was in that nurse manager role, which you started out talking about in the beginning, man, what a tough job, but also the most rewarding job. I really liked to look for candidates that had waited tables or played sports. and look at that skill set and how it plays value. It translates quite well, whether you're nursing or nursing support. People want to practice to their full scope. And failing to embrace, all that they offer as a whole person and their experiences handicaps that individual. Top talent probably eventually will lead to turnover, but we can help connect people to the possibilities that are out there.
Yeah, I think you raise, as I'm listening to you, I'm jotting down some notes. I think the conform and control, there's some work by Edgar Schein, who I'm a total junkie for his work and his research around career anchors. And he takes the position that most organizations are kind of selfish. They're in it for what they need at this moment in time. And yes, they might have succession planning, and yes, they have development programs. But at the end of the day, there's some hesitancy to create turnover, right? If you do too much development, then you accidentally or maybe intentionally lose someone. And sometimes managers have a hard time losing someone to a bigger, better, different opportunity, because then they have failed. And I always say to managers, you can look at it like that if you want, or you can look at it as, I just succession planned this person to the next phase of their career. And so I think changing that mindset. And then Edgar Schein also talks about the corporation isn't necessarily going to manage your career. They're going to manage the workforce. So you really have to take ownership of your own career planning. And he has a wonderful tool that we'll make available, the link for everyone, the Career Anchors Inventory, which is my total favorite, because it helps you identify what is it that makes your heart sing for work. What is it that you love, and you will always gravitate to a job that has that particular constellation of activities or competencies. And a lot of times we fight against what our true anchor is, because society expects things, or the organization or our leader or manager. So, if you take his survey, it helps you get a better understanding of yourself. And then you can think about, what else do I need to do to make that job or that next step work for me?
I love that. And I totally agree with the mind shifts change. We really do need to be thinking about, how do we grow this person to where they are going to be the most successful, and not view it as a failure. I think it's the greatest joy to see someone move into what their true passion is.
Yeah. Well, and I also wonder too, sometimes in organizations, if you have an employee that's not quite performing at the way that you would like, perhaps that's got everything to do with, that's not the right job for them.
Yeah.
And taking a look at, gosh, what is this person really good at, and understanding. That's why those nurse managers who are aware, what are the other opportunities, especially in these big, like Ascension.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the ability to really let a nurse move throughout that whole organization and do lots of different things. So talk about a little bit, what have you seen, or are you beginning to see some organizations thinking beyond their four walls for succession, and thinking like bigger, like you said, maybe it's a lateral move, but it's in a bigger organization, or, urban to rural, what have you.
I think that's still pretty innovative, that people are willing to go there. I have seen it exist. I will tell you, in my time at Ascension, they had a really cool model of career coaches that was intentionally, that was their whole role, was to help find that, like you said, with 60,000 nurses, there should be a job for you everywhere, capitalizing on the skills that you offer and the desires that you have. It is quite rare, though, that I see people thinking beyond that. And in my time working at AONL, we used to ask a question: if you could have any leadership job in the world, what would it be and why? And so many answers were very limiting. And I think because of this traditional box, they couldn't think beyond their boss's job or the CNO, versus, wow, I could work for the Joint Commission, or I could be in Congress, or I could work for a national company. Dream big. I do think there are leaders out there, but I don't know that it has become the norm just yet.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, we're both, I think it's safe to say, we both believe lattices is the future and that's the way to build a career. So if some of our listeners are like, okay, I want to do whatever it might be, how knowing a lattice is the method, if you will, to achieve that ultimate goal. I'm a staff nurse or I'm a nurse manager. How do I figure out what are the possibilities and what I might be interested in? Is there a personal reflection piece? I mean, talk about how you get your mind ready to do that, or your person.
Well, I think that's an inside job for sure.
No pun intended.
None. Truly, just what you talked about, the anchor survey, things that really get you to know who you are and what drives you and what gets you out of bed every day. But I would also say, keep your mind open, along the journey. And I'll share a little bit about my own personal story. I thought I was going to be a midwife. So I got out of school and I said, I'm going to be the med-surg nurse because nobody will hire me as a new grad in L&D at that time. Did that, moved to L&D. I hated it. It was terrible. And so can you imagine if I had gone to grad school? So I took what you would think is a step back and went back to med-surg. And that's where I was introduced to shared governance, or as we're, calling it now, professional governance. And that's where I learned about leadership. Mm-hmm. And I watched this entire culture just transform before my eyes. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a CNO. I want to change culture. So I started on this, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm so proud of myself. I'm going to go to school and I'm going to do this. And, that journey led to me being asked to serve in this coordinator role, which would have been a title and pay step back. And when I got myself to the yes on that, because of the skills that it was going to offer, it's that keeping your mind open to possibilities. It actually turned out to be a director role. And so not only did I get the skills of bringing this new thing to life, but also that next level, which ultimately allowed me to work on a national level at AONL and now, running my own business. So I would say you have this idea of what you might think it would look like and where do I even start? It's stay open-minded and be open to the possibilities that show up, that are going to offer you more skills and get you more well-rounded. Mm-hmm. Don't get married to this idea of, well, that's lateral. Why would I make a lateral move? Or that's a step back. And I would say the network is invaluable, truly, whether that's, professional associations, which for me, AONL is a big part of that for me, but also ANPD or my other specialties, but step outside of healthcare too. I think there's so much to be gained from learning from other industries. Mm-hmm. Serve on a board, volunteer, and just keep asking questions and being willing to go through the next open door. Mm-hmm. Much like your personal life, right? You think you've got it all figured out. You've dreamed what it's going to look like. And life has this funny little way of saying, no, redirect. Mm-hmm. So I would say keep your mind open. The journey is very personal. So I don't think that there's a next right step.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. And I also believe that is why it is so challenging to do career coaching, if you will, for a large group of, I wonder how there aren't any webinars or there aren't any CE programs or a workshop on career planning, because it is so personalized and it's so individual where you live, what's your family situation. And so it almost is one of those activities that you really have to own for yourself. Yes. But then drive yourself too. No one is really going to bring it to you. So you have to just say, okay, I need to find out I want to do that. I need to find out as much as I can about how to get there. And you just have to network and ask, because there are no formulas. Mm-hmm. And there aren't there aren't any crib sheets where you can just check the boxes. I've checked this box. I'm going to go to the next box. It doesn't work that way.
No, I love what you just said. It reminded me when I was young, I used to write letters to famous people. And one time Oprah wrote me back. So you never know what opportunities are possible. Just reach out. I can't tell you how many times I've asked Brene Brown to meet me for coffee. So far, nothing, but I'm still.
Someday she's going to call you back, right? So I want to go back and just you can help me plug a little bit, AONL and the competency, what would you inventory for that? So is that some tool that you recommend nurses use to, because I didn't personally, I don't think I knew what I was really good at until I was about 8 years into my career, because I would stay 3 years at a job, get bored, and then move on. And then, I'm a fixer, get bored, move on. And it took me a while to figure out I was a strategic thinker, conceptual thinker, and I knew what I was good at. But I confess, I didn't know that early on, and I'm not sure. I mean, maybe some folks do, but you may not know right away. So talk a little bit maybe about how the AONE competencies can start to help. Even if you don't necessarily want a career in formal nursing leadership, there's still value in assessing yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And leadership applies across, doesn't matter which role you're in.
Well, that's a good point. Yes, you're exactly right. So yeah, that's right.
A position of authority. So I do highly recommend it. And they actually just updated their competencies recently. So they're quite robust, but it is a really great foundation to say, how do I score myself on these areas, whether it's managing the business or the people, the relationship component. They're really well outlined and good for you to say, where am I? But what I would encourage you to do is not to do that alone. I think for a lot of the time in my early career, and even sometimes now, I still have the tendency to slip into trying to do it all by myself. But leaning on those mentors and your network and saying, do you see the same things that I'm seeing? Because if there's a discrepancy, that's really where the growth can occur. I'm a big fan of not harping too much on your weaknesses. I mean, we have areas of opportunity, and sure, you need to pay attention to them, but complement to them and play to your strengths. And in addition to that, she's an executive coach, Deb Girardi. I met her through AONL, and she did some work, an immunity to change map that I felt was so powerful. Had everyone go back and ask, and I do this every year. I ask my closest friends and colleagues, what is the single most powerful thing I could do to improve my leadership? And the feedback that you get from a really trusted source, it's pretty incredible. And the theme always emerges and can be the focus. So I do think the work to get to know yourself is really important.
Well, and I love what you said about, this is why we get along. I love what you said about, I love what you said about every nurse is a leader, even if you're not in a formal leader title. And I know that statement gets perhaps overused, or maybe I can almost hear some staff nurses' eyeballs rolling because they don't necessarily see themselves that way. But I would venture to say that if you desire to move off of the traditional ladder, once you start to lattice your career, I think that those leadership skills become very important. And that's not to say they're not on a ladder, but when you're latticing and exploring new things, and it's like you said, relationships, communication, am I good at the business? Am I good at managing people? That kind of knowledge about yourself, I think, is really helpful, especially if you are wanting. I've had this very interesting career, and I worked in 2 advertising agencies, and you talk to a nurse and they're like, oh, wow, that would be so cool. I would love to do that. How did you do that? Well, first, I'm not afraid to take a risk. And number 2, I always tell nurses, never, ever, ever let your license expire.
Right.
Because if you're going to take a risky lateral move or you don't want to not have your license, because you never know. Life throws you curveballs, as you said, but you have to be thinking about, for me, going into the ad agency, for some people, like, that environment was okay for me. But for some people, like, there were no policies and procedures. These are
Sounds like my
creative
dream.
people. They're creative people. So, we come out of healthcare very structured. And so you have to be really careful about what kind of organization or what kind of culture you're comfortable in too. It's not just your skills, because for some, it's like nurses who want to go work in startups. Okay, that's a great lattice. That's a great job. But are you ready for how different that is?
Oh man, that I felt that big time moving out of working in a hospital, going to association work. Complete culture shock.
Right.
And you're right. I don't know. You said you can't be afraid to take the risk. I think I'm always afraid, but courageous at the same time.
Yeah, I think it depends on how much tolerance you have for risk, right? I tend to have a pretty low tolerance for risk. So and I will also say, and this is really related, the day I got the phone call from one of the vice presidents at the ad agency, and they said, I want you to come and work for us. I was like, what do you need a nurse for? So I could have said no and hung up the phone, but you don't do that. You at least take a phone call or take a meeting or go to coffee and just have the conversation. You never know.
You never know. Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier is just be open to the possibilities.
That's right.
You don't have to commit.
Yeah, right. You're not, yes, exactly. You're dating before you get married.
Right. I'm only married to the passion and the purpose, not the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So talk a little bit about what does it take to succeed? And you talk about 3 steps. You talk about inclusion, getting in the door. And then influence? Are those your, so talk a little bit about what are those 3 steps and what will it take for a nurse who wants to try a lattice career kind of move?
Yeah. So the 3 steps: inclusion, influence, and impact.
Okay.
So that inclusion is getting yourself in the door. Do you have the competence to do this job? Can you or can't you perform? Do you have the skills? Do you have the credentials? But you could get stuck at this stage. There are easily measurable outcomes in this job, and you can keep getting promoted into the same kind of work at a higher level. But that's boxing yourself in. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's the path that you want to take. But don't forget the ability to see new perspectives and the interdepartmental work, how that could really shape your ability to make an impact and close some of the gaps that we're trying to get. So that's the inclusion piece. The influence piece is how do you shape events and lives of others? So how do you get that seat at the table? How do you belong to the decision-making circle? And again, it doesn't have to be a position of authority. You can have influence without authority. In fact, I think most people without an authority are the ones making the most influence. And then for the impact part, it's that network. The network you have brings so much. The influence piece, it's all about relationships. Can you sit on the boards? Can you build relationships and connections that are going to guide and assist you? But those indirect connections lead to amazing things. And that impact piece is doing something for the wider world. Mm-hmm. So those are the 3 steps. But I'd also say, moving in all these directions helps you build these transferable skills and really just enjoy the journey. The view is so much better, from point A to point, like enjoy the journey. There's plenty of room for all of us to shine according to the gifts that we have. And I would say define your brand. I don't know that I've talked about that, but you don't have to fit inside what someone else says. Know who you are and own it. And like I said, you have all the gifts you need inside of you. Just keep cultivating those.
Well, one of the things you just said, and I want to start to wrap up a little bit, but one of the things, the inclusion and the influence, I think it's one of the beauties of nursing as a career is that the flexibility that it affords. And this is before COVID, right? Before COVID, we had many, 12 hour, we had options. And so you may not at this particular point in your career because of family or other commitments, maybe it's a school commitment, do that move. So you have to kind of plan. When is it time to maybe, you've got the kids at home or whatever the case is, there's opportunities to move back and forth between your inclusion and influence, because it depends a lot on where you're at in your life. And when those things change, then you have to relook at, okay, those 3 steps that you talked about. So you just have, and that all goes back to being open to possibilities. So one of the final things I want to wrap up with, though, and I know you and I are aligned on this, talk more, because I probably harp on it too much. Never stop learning. I think lifelong learning is one of those roll my eyes again. But if you think you are interested in doing a Lattice career.
Yes. So yeah, we're going to be definitely on the same page as this. Never stop learning. I learn something new every day. And I think, again, this is very individualized. I think we can create our own curriculums. It's got to be personal. So, for me, I like to read a ton, and that author will lead me to a podcast, which takes me down a whole rabbit hole. I'm then following you on LinkedIn. I'm listening to your TED Talk, and then I'm talking to my colleagues about it. And suddenly I have this wealth of knowledge about something that, on any particular day, it just drove my personal passion. So I would say, don't be afraid to create your own curriculum. Not everybody has access to development that's affordable or customized. That's a big part of which drives me to do the work that I do, because not everybody can have it. So you don't have to rely solely on your employer to advance you. Like going back to that, what I said, it's an inside job. It shouldn't be limited to this next stage on the rung. And I'm not solely talking about, career shifts either. Like I mentioned earlier, serving on boards and volunteering in the community, all of these things advance you. So whether it's a formal education or you want to be part of a fellowship program or some sort of traditional learning, don't limit yourself. There's so many avenues and mediums today that there's no reason it's right at your fingertips, and often free.
And I think too, Crystal, when you said this, you didn't say it, but this is what you imply. When you're doing that level of reading and learning, you're going to find someone who's probably pretty knowledgeable. And then you pick up the phone and call that person. And then you just never know where that conversation might lead. And you just never know.
Right.
So
and it's amazing how many people will say, yeah.
I know.
Will say yes. They're willing to help.
They are. And I find 9 times out of 10, I find nurses to very much be that way. Yeah. If you saw a nurse that was doing something and you were really interested and I want to do what she's doing, I wonder how he got there. Yeah. If you were to call that nurse, I would bet they'd be pretty helpful.
Yeah, probably 9 times out of 10, if not more.
That's right. That's right. So this has been so amazing. I told my colleagues at Vivian, I'm just talking to all my friends. Right. But I think it's great that you're kind of carrying the mantle now. You're the next generation of nurse leaders doing really non-traditional work, and the world is more used to us. Not a lot. I mean, there's still not enough of us, but there are enough nurses in non-traditional careers who've gotten there by the way of a lattice that I believe it'll become more and more common for nurses to career that lets them follow their passion. Really is my take home message from everything you've said.
Yeah. Well, so, I've enjoyed this conversation tremendously. I think if I had a closing thought, it would be, find the path of what you should be doing very limited and unimaginative. And to go back to, how you started, as Fleetwood Mac says, you can go your own way. Maybe the younger generation, one of my favorite songs is Take the Road Less Traveled. So the journey from point A to point B is, much more fulfilling with a less limited view. So why limit yourself? Stop shooting on yourself and take the road less traveled.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to have another session where we talk about how do you think about school and certifications and credentials, because that's also a whole nother piece that can facilitate the lattice. So we'll have to come back for another round.
That sounds fun.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to thank you, Dr. Crystal Lawson, and thank you to all of you for joining us today at Vivian Health for our On the Horizon in Healthcare. If you have any questions or comments or need resources, please let us know. We'll be sure to answer those questions for you, and you can reach us at hire.vivian.com. And thank you.